Hello and welcome back to the Franchise Growth Pod. This is Belle, Director of Marketing at AC Inc. And I am back with one of our incredible AC team members, Jen Brannon. How are you doing?
I'm great, Belle. How are you?
I am so good. It's always a lovely day when I get to podcast with you. How are things? How is your busy week going?
Busy, busy. Lots going on. Lots of working with lots of franchise systems, trying to boost up their franchisee support, which is, as you know, my favorite thing. As a
It is
former
my favorite
franchisee, I think it's the number one priority that any franchisor should have.
Of course, of course. I feel like I owe it to our good friend Jordan to say it's your favorite thing except for your cottage. Your cottage is also your favorite thing.
That is true. That is good point. Good point.
Good to have lots of favorite things though.
Yes,
Franchisee support, cottages,
yeah,
vacations, your family. You have lots of things you love.
I do. I do. That's for sure.
That's awesome. I am really, really excited to get into our topic for today. Jen and I are getting a couple episodes done. We just did a really, really awesome one all about what coaching calls actually look like. So definitely do check out that episode as well when that one comes out. I'll link that one actually in the notes. Why don't I do that? And then that way everyone can get access to that as well. But this episode today, I really wanted to get your thoughts, Jen, because you were a very successful franchisee for many, many years, and then now are helping franchise systems put those support systems in place, get that strategic growth coaching to be a bigger part of the franchise space in general, make sure franchisees are more profitable, engaged, and supported than ever, which is amazing. But there it's not just about the systems and the spreadsheets and the getting everything in place. A lot of it is actually about the culture of growth, coaching, success, wanting your owners to be the most successful, profitable business owners that they possibly can be. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. And it's a little bit of a broad topic, but it's something I think is really important to clarify is the difference between getting systems in place, which is a lot of what we help with, but also we help with kind of creating that buy-in, creating that mindset, starting a lot earlier in the process too, about talking about this kind of coaching, talking about this kind of ongoing support that goes beyond, asset libraries and hotlines and those kinds of things, which are so valuable. But to go beyond that and kind of build a culture of ongoing strategic support is a bit of a bigger task, would you say?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we see all the time franchisors with even 10, 50, 100, 300 units who haven't done it, haven't done much of it.
Mhm.
And what's happening is a lot of times it's causing some friction with their franchise owners because their owners are feeling many different things, that they're not getting supported, that the franchisor potentially only cares about, top line sales revenue, as opposed to what I always say, the money in the franchisee's pocket.
Mhm.
And so I really think figuring out a way to do that wherever you are is really, really important. How to start creating that culture of growth for your
Yeah.
franchise.
And I guess the $1,000,000 question is how exactly do you do that? Because creating culture is kind of it's an ongoing thing. And it requires, I feel like ongoing things, like softer skill training, people things, culture, leadership, all those kinds of things. I think it feels like because we have to do that ongoing, it's not like something you do once and you're like, perfect, now all of our leaders are great. You don't just do it once. It's kind of this ongoing, it's kind of like professional development in general. Like it's an ongoing thing. But I feel like because something is ongoing does not mean you don't have to take very intentional steps to accomplish it. Does that make sense? Like sometimes I feel like because something like leadership development, for example, because we do that kind of for our entire careers and for teams just continue to do it, I feel like sometimes we forget you actually have to do things like take steps to put that in place. Have you noticed that in terms of that building that culture of support and coaching? Like there are things people kind of need to still do. Like we're going to talk in a second here about like bringing it up in the FD process and things like that. Have you noticed that like in terms of implementing that sometimes like we need that reminder of like here are some steps that actually will help create that culture, kind of having action steps for that?
For sure, because I feel like it's not first and foremost priority to most franchisors because, again, until they come across the AC Inc., like there's no school to be a franchisor. And
Mhm.
most franchisors are figuring it out as they go and have done that forever, kind
Mhm.
of thing. That's just what we're finding. We're trying to change the thinking a little bit to get franchisors to be more intentional right from the beginning with a solid focus on franchisee support.
Yeah.
And so it is more of a challenge to go back in time, but it absolutely can be done. And a lot of this is about the messaging,
Mm.
about the messaging around it and how it's a priority for the franchisor and the home
The
office
home
of the
office team,
franchisor,
yeah.
right? Why it's a priority, but not just, we can't just say it. We got to live it.
Mm.
And so I feel that either, again, if you're starting out or if you're more experienced and have been around for a long time, is really creating an intentional strategic plan around that. So coming up with that messaging of why franchisee support is important to you, or sorry, not franchisee support, but why the growth mindset of franchisee support is important. And that's because you care about your franchisees. You want them to make money. You want them to be successful. You want them one day to sell their franchise and get a nice return on their investment. And
Yeah.
so you want these things for them, and you are going to put pieces in place to help reinforce that all along the way.
Mm.
So, so that could even very well be managing some expectations right from the beginning, right? You mentioned the franchise development process. So if you want to offer really great growth coaching and a lot of skill development and all of these things, you were talking about an asset library and an intranet, and there's a million things we can offer our franchisees. So we want to put that in place, but then we want to be talking about how in the initial process when we're working with prospects about all of these things that we have in place and why. And
Mm.
that's because we have a culture of growth and a culture of coaching and training for profitability and satisfaction and all of these things.
So first step is to kind of get aligned as a home office team on the message, and the message being genuine to you, right? So thinking, and I always, and I'm a messaging queen, as you know, I'm obsessed with it. And I always say like messaging is weird because I think a lot of people feel like it needs to be completely unique from everybody else's. But that doesn't necessarily, sometimes there's only so many ways we can say something. We don't need to overcomplicate it. Sometimes you just genuinely care a ton about having your franchisees do really, really well. And you want them to be making lots of money and them to be supporting their families and contributing to their local community. And we don't need to come up with like 10 different ways to say that. That can just be something you as a home office team really care about. And I think that being the beginning is so amazing. So kind of solidifying that, getting really aligned on that. I love that that's the first step, but you're totally right. We can't just say it and kind of tell people in those calls and those FD calls. We have to actually show, right? So either showing the resources that we're going to be providing, or maybe, telling them about what the coaching process is going to be like. What would you say kind of in that early onset FD process? So even just figuring out if people are the right fit for your brand specifically, or explaining to them what they're going to get as far as support. What would you say that what would you say are some steps people could do early in that process to, as you mentioned, expectation setting, explaining why this actually matters to your team, why it matters to your potential franchisee? What would you say those steps are earlier in the process? And then we'll talk a little bit more about maybe later in the process, or kind of getting buy-in later. But in that early process, when you're really trying to get that across, what are some things people could do that would be helpful?
Well, I think, as you said, it's first putting it into action in the franchise, but then it's talking about, and this can help you with your vetting too of
Mm.
candidates, making sure you're getting the right people, because you can talk about how we offer launch coaching, for instance. So for the first 6 months, you're going to have your own launch coach that is going to help you put out fires, solve all your issues, do these kinds of things, and make sure that you're up and running. And then when you're ready, you'll graduate to strategic growth coaching, and this is what that'll look like. But then you can, as the franchisor, whoever's your director of development or whatever, can be talking to that person about, how does that land with you? Are you have you ever had coaches before?
Mhm.
How does that excite you to have someone that's going to be working with you to grow and to tweak what you're doing? Because that can if somebody's not open to coaching, that tells you a lot
Mm.
about them. And if this is your culture that you want to be living and breathing, then and they're not into it, or they're just like, yeah, okay. Or if they kind of say, oh, well, I won't need any of that because I've run my own business before.
Mm.
That's going to be some big red flags.
And that'll open up some really interesting conversations too, because it's not necessarily even to say like, oh, if maybe someone does have lots of business experience and they're just thinking this person, all they're going to do is go, here's how you look at a P&L statement. Maybe they know how to do that, and that's great. But if they have any kind of ego around that, you're totally right. It's going to open up some of those interesting conversations about, well, here's actually what you're going to get out of that, or here's why we offer this as a way for you to get, maybe that person does have a ton of business experience and that coach can help with even further, like helping them open a second location after a few years, whatever that looks like maybe that person could help with some even furthering of what they want to get after. But you're so right, it'll open up some really interesting dynamics if someone is maybe not going to be a great fit for following systems, or being, having that kind of team mindset when it comes to the brand or comes to the business in general. I love that as a tip. I think that's so important, especially if you want everyone to have that same, approach of growth and optimizing success and, chasing their best and all those kinds of things.
I will, yeah, for sure, for sure. And I will say, if a franchisor is super intentional about that, and really focused on franchisee support, growth coaching, all the things we've kind of been talking about, and manage those, or presents that in the FD process,
Mm.
and again, using that strategic growth coaching, and your priority is their profitability, making them successful, making them really strong business owners, that's very, very powerful. And when if you've got candidates that are looking at you and some other models, other different concepts or whatever, focusing on that is a massive selling feature. So,
Yeah.
not only do we want to be doing this, but it will help you with your franchise sales for sure, because
Yeah.
it's important, especially these days. Our candidates are much more educated than they ever have been, because there's so many more franchises than there ever have been, especially if they're looking at other brands. That's really important as well. And I did want to say one other thing, kind of changing gears a little bit, for those of you out there that are more established and are thinking to yourself, man, we haven't focused on franchisee support. I might meet them or call them once a month, or no news is good news, or whatever. Your messaging to them, if you've made a conscious effort that we're going to change this, we are going to get ourselves franchise, field coaches. We are going to run roundtables. We are going to teach them how to be business owners, all of these things. All your messaging, and I've worked with one brand that had 80 units. And all it was recognizing, hey guys, basically we've dropped the ball. Like, we haven't supported you as we want to in the past, but that is going to change. We're focused on this. This is our focus going forward, and here are the changes that we're making.
Wow.
um and it just as simple as that. Like, we recognize we haven't done it, we're doing it now, because we know how important it is, and we
Yeah.
want you all to be profitable and all of that kind of stuff. And then, but the biggest thing is you've got to follow through. And
Mm.
that's the biggest mistake that I see franchisors make, is they do a lot of talking promises. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. And then it doesn't happen. And then, everything is going to kind of backfire from there. So if you're going to do it, it's just making sure that you follow through.
That's
And
really interesting. And actually, that was the next thing I wanted to ask about, because I think the setting the expectations really early feels very intuitive, right? Once you know that this is a priority for you, and you're maybe starting out, maybe you're more emerging brand, and this is a big priority, and you want to start that really, really early in that development process. That feels pretty intuitive, even how to do that, right? Using it as a key selling feature, talking about what that's going to mean, using that as part of vetting, like that all feels pretty solid for anyone who's maybe been a franchisor in that space. But what I think is so interesting is the idea of, yeah, how do you kind of bring that to your owners if you, again, if you have 50 units, if you have 100 units, and that hasn't been a really core priority in the past, which happens all the time. Like it's very, very common. Don't feel, yeah, like if you're sitting there with 100 units going, we don't have that in place. Very, very normal. But it is something that if that owner success, owner profitability, and excitement and happiness in your system is super, super important, like a core value of your brand, then it does feel like, that's the next step is like, let's put that in place. Let's make sure our owners are, setting goals and are getting excited about becoming more profitable, about growing their business, about even just making their business run easier. That's a huge one too, right? And making it so that our staffing isn't as tricky, all those things. But getting that buy-in later, and that's interesting. You said some people have done even just an email saying like, we know we haven't focused on this. We really are going to start doing this now. But the follow through is really interesting. So my question is, if you are a little bit more of an established or growing brand, you have lots of owners already in your system who are maybe seeking this kind of support or seeking this kind of strategic growth coaching, and you're going to say, hey, we're going to put this in place. What would you say kind of you would need to have in place before saying that? Do you kind of say it and then put everything in place and then run that risk of it not being a priority and not being able to fit those deadlines? Like, let's say, we're all going to do this next quarter and then it's not a priority. And so then nothing's in place quite yet. Like, as far as kind of timeline, would you suggest having coaches in place and training and all of that done and then kind of announcing and getting buy-in? Like, just when it comes to, I just feel like that would be a tricky thing to understand how to do timing wise. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think coming up with your list first, like what don't we have, or maybe even what do we have that is in place supporting the franchisees. Maybe it's
Yeah.
the asset library, the
Mhm.
internet, maybe it's a CRM, maybe it's, all whatever, maybe you do a annual conference with them. Like
Mhm.
there are things, most franchisors have things in place already. So you
Totally.
do that. What are those other things similar to that that you want to do? So maybe it's like, okay, now we need an intranet, for instance.
Mhm.
So maybe before you make the big announcement, you get a few more wins. So
Mhm.
you get an intranet in place. I don't know, whatever. Maybe it's like, okay, we're going to take over the social media. So you
Mhm.
get the social media company in place and work with them and get the plan, get the scheduling platform, get them working on a whole bunch of things or whatever it might be. So you have a few things that you can, when you're going to make that announcement. And I actually do recommend, rather than it being necessarily just an email, hey, it is on some kind of like town hall,
Mhm.
Zoom meeting, like let them see you, or even you could record a video
Mhm.
of you speaking to them, whatever it might be, making sure that it's super personable. It could be at your annual convention or meeting or regional meeting, whatever it might be. And then sharing those wins. Like okay, here's what we've done. X, Y, and Z is in place, ready to go. On February 1st, this is going to happen. And so you're not just waiting on those. You're not just saying we're going to do these things and there's no wins there,
Yeah.
right? So doing that, and then again, depending on what those other things are, let's make an assumption that there's not a solid field coaching department yet. Maybe your first one is you even before you announce it, is you hire that person. Could
Mhm.
be, I just worked with a brand where we hired, I helped hire for them an operations manager slash field coach. And they needed her to come in with her experience, to totally be able to see, and with my help, what do we not have that we need to have as far as infrastructure.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she's also coaching the franchisees, taking over for me because I was kind of an interim coach with them.
Mhm.
So really seeing what you need and getting that man or woman power
Yeah.
in place, and then get them. They don't have to be fully trained or whatever, but they're in place so that franchisees are like, okay, action's happening, you know.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that, and that's probably going to help a lot of people with that kind of timeline thing, because you're so right. Like, to make an announcement without kind of a solid plan of like, okay, we're bringing someone on, and we actually have already started that process, and we're actually having someone help us hire someone who's going to have all the right traits, and we're going to make sure they're trained. You can get Jen to train your coach. Just a little plug there. She's phenomenal at it. She's done it many times. Very good. But to say all of that in kind of part of that buy-in piece is probably huge when it comes to that trust, right? And I actually love the idea of starting off with some smaller wins that are in the franchisee support area, so that franchise owners know that you're not just saying, we really want you guys to succeed and we're going to provide more support, and not see anything actually coming from that or actually kind of headed in that direction. So I love that there's that kind of buy-in and trust piece that can be built, but then you're still not having to have every single thing in place before you make that announcement and get everyone excited and get everyone bought in. So I like that time wise. I think that's probably going to be helpful for people who maybe are wondering, like, how would we actually put this into place if we don't yet? Because I think, starting in the beginning is obviously amazing, but there are so many franchise brands who are excited about this, but just they already kind of exist with certain franchisee support structures and want to be putting that new one in place. Jen, I love our chats. I always get so much out of them. You are just so wise. I absolutely love talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. I always love to hang with you.
It's the best. Well, if anyone wants to hang with me and Jen and come talk all things franchising and growth and strategic support, please do come join the AC Roundtables if you have not already. We have 2 free roundtables, one for emerging brands and one for established brands, that run every single week on Zoom. You can come hang out with the AC community, problem solve in real time. It's really, really incredible. We've been running those for coming on 3 full years, which is so insane. And you can get all the details and come try out a roundtable at angelacote.com/roundtables. We also have professional development opportunities in the form of roundtables for franchise marketers and field coaches. So if you are a field coach yourself, or if you have field coaches that you'd love for them to get some further development, get to interact with peers, learn best practice strategies, you can get all the details on the same page. It's all in the same spot. I so appreciate you coming on, Jen. Thank you so much. Go be awesome, everybody. We'll see you next time.